Thursday evening, November 23rd, 7:42 p.m. The exact moment I watched my sister Jessica tell our entire family that I wasn't really one of them. Her words cut through the Thanksgiving dinner conversation like a knife through warm butter. "Alex has always been different," she announced, gesturing with her wine glass toward my end of the table. "Honestly, sometimes I wonder if we're actually related. They're just so—" She paused dramatically, searching for the right word, while our cousins leaned in eagerly. "Disconnected from what family really means." The room fell silent, except for the gentle clink of silverware against china. Uncle Pete's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Aunt Carol's eyes darted between Jessica and me like she was watching a tennis match. My parents, Bob and Linda, said absolutely nothing. Their silence spoke volumes. I set down my napkin, excused myself quietly, and walked out of that colonial house in Salem's Hayesville neighborhood for what I thought would be the last time. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The drive back to my downtown Portland apartment felt like traveling through a time warp. 45 minutes of winding highway between Salem and the city, between the life my family expected me to live and the one I'd actually built for myself. The warehouse district where I lived couldn't have been more different from the manicured suburban streets where I'd grown up. My building used to manufacture textiles in the 1940s, and now it housed young professionals who preferred exposed brick walls to white picket fences. I loved everything about it. The industrial aesthetic, the diverse neighbors, the proximity to Powell's books, and the Pearl District, where I worked as a project manager for a growing software company. That Thanksgiving evening, I sat in my one-bedroom apartment with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River, replaying Jessica's words in my mind. This wasn't the first time she'd made comments about my life choices. When I'd moved to Portland 3 years ago for my job at TechFlow Solutions, she'd rolled her eyes and said I was abandoning my roots. When I'd started dating Marcus, my colleague who happened to be Black, she'd made awkward comments about how different our worlds were. When I decided not to join the family's restaurant supply business after college, she'd accused me of thinking I was too good for honest work. The pattern had been building for years, but hearing her declare in front of our entire extended family that I wasn't really one of them crystallized something I'd been trying to ignore. Jessica had always been the golden child. 2 years older than me, she'd followed the expected path perfectly. Stayed in Salem, married her high school boyfriend David, took a marketing job at a local company, bought a house 4 blocks from our parents. She was everything our traditional family valued, and I was everything they didn't quite understand. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "How was dinner with the family?" I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back, "I think I'm officially an outsider now." He called immediately, his warm voice filling the quiet apartment. Marcus and I had met during my first week at TechFlow when he'd helped me navigate the company's complex project management software. What started as professional collaboration had evolved into something deeper. He was brilliant, kind, and understood my ambition in ways my family never had. "What happened?" he asked, and I found myself recounting the entire evening. The subtle digs throughout dinner, Jessica's grand pronouncement, the family's complicit silence. Marcus listened without interrupting, a quality I'd grown to love about him. When he finished, he was quiet for a moment before saying, "You know what this means, right? You're free to live your life without constantly trying to prove yourself to people who've already made up their minds about you." His words hit deeper than I expected. For years, I'd been performing an exhausting balancing act, trying to maintain family connections while pursuing goals they didn't value. I've driven to Salem every other weekend, attended every birthday party and holiday gathering, sent thoughtful gifts, and made myself available whenever anyone needed help. But Jessica was right about one thing. I was different. I wanted a career that challenged me, a partner who supported my ambitions, and a life that extended beyond the boundaries of my hometown. The next few months passed peacefully. I threw myself at work, leading a major software implementation for one of our biggest clients. The project required long hours and complex problem solving, exactly the kind of challenge that energized me. Marcus and I grew closer, spending weekends exploring Portland's food scene and hiking in the Columbia River Gorge. We talked about the future, not in abstract terms, but with genuine excitement about building something together. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living authentically rather than apologetically. Christmas came and went without the usual family drama. I'd sent gifts, but declined to attend the gathering, citing work deadlines. The truth was, I wasn't ready to subject myself to another performance where I pretended everything was normal while being treated as a reluctant appendage to the family structure. Jessica had made it clear where I stood, and I was surprisingly relieved to stop fighting for a seat at a table where I wasn't truly welcome. My parents called occasionally, brief conversations that skirted around the Thanksgiving incident. Dad would ask about work in his gruff way, while Mom would inquire about whether I was eating enough vegetables. Neither mentioned Jessica's comments or acknowledged that anything had changed. Their willful blindness to family dysfunction was nothing new. They'd perfected the art of preserving surface harmony while ignoring underlying problems. Spring arrived early that year, and Portland bloomed into the lush green paradise that had drawn me to the Pacific Northwest. I was promoted to senior project manager, a role that came with increased responsibility and a salary that finally allowed me to start thinking about buying a place of my own. Marcus and I began house hunting in the neighborhoods we loved, areas with tree-lined streets and community gardens, where neighbors knew each other's names and downtown was just a bike ride away. It was during this period of contentment that Uncle Pete called. Dad's younger brother had always been the family diplomat, the one who stayed neutral during conflicts and maintained relationships with everyone. His voice sounded strained when I answered the phone on a Tuesday evening in April. "Alex, we need to talk," he said without his usual warm greeting. "Can you meet me for coffee this weekend?
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Something about Jessica you need to know. I felt my stomach drop. Uncle Pete's tone carried the weight of serious news, the kind that changes everything. "Is she okay?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "It's complicated," he replied. "Saturday afternoon at Stumptown on Division? This isn't something to discuss over the phone." The coffee shop was crowded when I arrived, filled with the usual Portland mix of students, freelancers, and weekend warriors fueling up for adventures. Uncle Pete had claimed a corner table, his usually cheerful demeanor replaced by something heavier. He stood to hug me, but his embrace felt different, protective and apologetic at the same time. "Thanks for coming," he said as we settled into worn leather chairs. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to hear from any of us after Thanksgiving." I stirred cream into my coffee, buying time to process the unexpected vulnerability in his voice. Uncle Pete had never acknowledged the family dynamics that everyone else pretended didn't exist. "You were there," I said carefully. "You heard what she said." He nodded, his expression pained. "I should have spoken up. We all should have. Jessica was wrong to say those things, and your parents were wrong to let her." He paused, studying his hands. "But that's not why I called you." The coffee shop noise seemed to fade as he leaned forward. "Jessica's sick, Alex. Really sick. Her kidneys are failing." The words hit me like a physical blow. Despite everything that had happened between us, Jessica was still my sister, the girl who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd scared away bullies at school, who'd been my closest companion before we'd grown into such different people. "What do you mean, failing?" I managed to ask. Uncle Pete explained what he knew. Jessica had been feeling tired and nauseous for months, symptoms she'd attributed to stress at work. When she'd finally seen a doctor, blood tests revealed severe kidney dysfunction. Further testing had confirmed polycystic kidney disease, a genetic condition that had been silently destroying her kidney function for years. She was already in stage 4 of 5, approaching end-stage renal disease. "The doctors say she needs a transplant," Uncle Pete continued. "Dialysis can buy time, but not much. Maybe a year, possibly 2 if she's lucky. He met my eyes directly. They've tested everyone in the family. David isn't to match. Your parents are too old and have health issues that disqualify them. Emma has a different blood type. I have diabetes, which rules me out. I knew where this was leading, but I needed him to say it. And, "You're the only one left to test," he said quietly. "The only family member who might be compatible." The irony was staggering. 6 months after being told I wasn't really family, I was suddenly the only family member who could save Jessica's life. I sat in that coffee shop, watching baristas steam milk and customers type on laptops, trying to process the cosmic joke of the situation. The sister who'd publicly dismissed my place in the family now needed something only I could provide. "Does she know you're telling me this?" I asked. Uncle Pete's expression grew complicated. "The family's been debating how to approach you. Jessica wanted to wait, see if other options developed. Your parents thought maybe Aunt Carol should call, since she's good with words. Everyone's walking on eggshells, afraid of how you'll react after what happened." I felt a familiar anger rising, not at Jessica's illness, but at the family's assumption that they could manipulate the situation to their advantage. Even facing a life-threatening crisis, they were strategizing about how to manage me rather than simply being honest about what they needed. "What does Jessica think about asking me?" I pressed. Uncle Pete was quiet for a long moment. "She's scared," he finally admitted. "Scared of the illness, scared of asking for help, and scared that you'll say no. She knows she hurt you, Alex. She knows what she said was wrong." But knowing and acknowledging were different things. Jessica hadn't reached out to apologize or attempt to repair our relationship. She'd simply hoped that family obligation would override personal hurt when the stakes became high enough. It was the same pattern that had defined our family for years. Problems ignored until they became crises, then everyone expected to rally around without addressing the underlying issues. I drove home through Portland's afternoon traffic, my mind spinning with questions and emotions I wasn't ready to untangle. The city I'd grown to love felt different somehow, as if Jessica's illness had shifted the gravity of my world. The life I'd built, my job, my relationship with Marcus, my carefully constructed independence, suddenly felt fragile in the face of this unwelcome pull back into family drama. That evening, I called Marcus and asked him to come over. When he arrived with Thai takeout and his usual warm smile, I realized how much I needed his steady presence. We sat on my couch overlooking the river, and I told him everything Uncle Pete had shared. Marcus listened with the same careful attention he brought to complex coding problems, asking clarifying questions and offering insights without rushing to judgment. "What are you thinking?" he asked when I finished. "I'm thinking this is exactly the kind of situation my family creates. They treat you terribly when they don't need anything, then expect you to drop everything and sacrifice when they do. It's emotional manipulation in disguise as family loyalty." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "But setting aside the family dynamics for a moment, how do you feel about Jessica being sick?" The question cut through my anger to something deeper and more complicated. "Terrified," I admitted, "and guilty for being angry when she's facing something so serious. And furious that I feel guilty because being sick doesn't erase the way she's treated me." We talked until late that night, exploring the ethical and emotional complexities of the situation. Marcus helped me separate Jessica's illness from the family patterns that had hurt me, while acknowledging that both were real and both mattered. By the time he left, I knew what I needed to do first, even if I wasn't ready to make the bigger decision. The next morning, I called Oregon Health and Science University Hospital and scheduled an appointment to learn about kidney donation. Not because I decided to help Jessica, but because I needed complete information before making such a consequential choice. The coordinator I spoke to was professional and thorough, explaining the testing process, surgical risks, and recovery timeline. She also emphasized something that surprised me. The decision to donate was entirely mine to make, regardless of family pressure or expectations. "We see situations like yours more often than you think," she said gently. "Family relationships are complicated, and medical crises don't automatically resolve other issues.
Our job is to ensure that donors are making informed, voluntary decisions based on their own values and circumstances." Her words stayed with me as I prepared for the appointment.
For the first time in this situation, someone had acknowledged that I had agency, that my choice mattered beyond its impact on Jessica's health. It was a perspective my family had never offered, too focused on their crisis to consider my autonomy. The hospital testing would take several hours and include blood work, imaging studies, psychological evaluation, and extensive counseling about the risks and benefits of donation. Win or lose, the process would give me the information I needed to make a decision I could live with, regardless of how my family responded. As I drove to the hospital the following week, I thought about the conversation that had started this journey. Jessica's declaration that I wasn't really family had stung because part of me had always suspected it was true. I'd never quite fit the mold they'd created, never shared their values or priorities in ways that felt authentic. But maybe being different wasn't the problem I'd always thought it was. Maybe it was simply who I was, and who I was had value, whether they recognized it or not. The question now wasn't whether I was family enough to save Jessica's life. The question was whether saving her life aligned with my own values and sense of what was right, independent of family expectations or obligations. For the first time in years, I was approaching a family crisis from a position of strength rather than desperation for acceptance. Whatever I decided, it would be my choice, made for my reasons, with full awareness of the consequences. That realization felt like freedom, even in the face of such a difficult decision. The blood draw at Oregon Health and Science University Hospital was the easy part. 3 vials of dark red liquid that would determine if my genetic makeup could save my sister's life. The phlebotomist, a woman named Rosa with gentle hands and kind eyes, made small talk about the weather while I stared at the ceiling tiles. She'd probably seen thousands of potential donors come through this lab, each carrying their own complicated family stories. Results should be back in 48 hours, she said, pressing a cotton ball to the needle site. Dr. Williams will call you personally with the results and next steps if you're a match. If I was a match. 2 simple words that carried the weight of years of family dysfunction and one sister's desperate need for survival. I drove back to my Pearl District office in a daze, trying to focus on the quarterly budget review I needed to complete before the afternoon client meeting. But concentration felt impossible when half my mind was calculating odds and the other half was rehearsing conversations I wasn't ready to have. Marcus found me in the break room an hour later, staring at a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. "How did it go?" he asked, settling into the chair across from me with his usual quiet presence. "Surreal," I admitted. 6 months ago, Jessica told everyone I wasn't really family. Now I'm sitting in a hospital lab hoping my blood might save her life. The universe has a twisted sense of humor. Marcus reached across the small table and covered my hand. "Have you thought about what you'll do if you are a match?" The question I'd been avoiding crystallized in the sterile fluorescent light of our office break room. "I keep going back and forth," I said slowly. "Part of me wants to help because she's my sister, regardless of what she said. But another part of me wonders if saving her life will just enable more of the same behavior. What if I donate a kidney and she goes right back to treating me like an outsider?" "Those are valid concerns," Marcus said. "But maybe this isn't really about Jessica's behavior. Maybe it's about who you want to be, independent of how she acts." His words stayed with me through the rest of that week. I found myself paying attention to my motivations in a way I never had before. Was I considering donation because I genuinely wanted to help, or because I was still seeking family approval? Was I hesitating because of legitimate concerns about the surgery and recovery, or because I was hurt and wanted Jessica to suffer consequences for her cruelty? The call came on Thursday afternoon when I was reviewing project timelines for our biggest client. Dr. Williams' voice was warm but professional when I answered. "Alex, I have your compatibility results. You're a very good match for your sister. Not perfect, but well within the range where we'd expect excellent outcomes." I felt the air leave my lungs. Somehow, despite preparing for this possibility, hearing the confirmation still shocked me. What does that mean exactly? It means that if you choose to proceed, Jessica would have an excellent chance of full recovery. The surgery would be laparoscopic for you, minimally invasive, with a typical recovery time of 4 to 6 weeks. For Jessica, it could mean decades of normal life instead of months of dialysis followed by likely death. The weight of that information settled over me like a heavy blanket. I had the power to give my sister her life back. The same sister who had publicly declared me an outsider, who had spent years making me feel like I didn't quite belong in my own family, now needed something only I could provide.
I need some time to think, I told Dr. Williams. Of course, this is an enormous decision. I'd like to schedule you for a full consultation next week where we can discuss every aspect of the procedure, risks, benefits, and recovery process. You'll also meet with our social worker and psychologist. We want to ensure you're making this choice for the right reasons. That evening, I called Uncle Pete to let him know about the test results. His relief was audible through the phone. "Thank God," he said. "This gives Jessica real hope for the first time in months." "Pete, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Has Jessica said anything about Thanksgiving? About what she said to me?" There was a long pause. "She's been different since the diagnosis," he said carefully. "Quieter, more reflective. I think facing your own mortality changes your perspective on things." "That's not what I asked." Another pause, longer this time. "No, Alex, she hasn't specifically apologized or mentioned that night, but she's scared, and I think she's realized how much she's pushed you away over the years. Whether she'll actually say that out loud, I don't know." His honesty was refreshing and infuriating. Even facing a life-threatening illness, Jessica couldn't acknowledge the pain she had caused. She was hoping that family obligation and my natural compassion would override the need for accountability or genuine reconciliation. That weekend, Marcus and I drove up to the Columbia River Gorge for a hike. The trail to Multnomah Falls was crowded with families and couples enjoying the spring weather, but we found quieter paths that wound through old.
All the testing and mental soul emotional heaviness had taken a toll on me. I needed a change of scenery. So Marcus and I escaped for a weekend up north in a beautiful Airbnb cabin nestled among the Cascades. The cabin had floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of old-growth forest and offered glimpses of the river below. There was something about being in nature that helped me think more clearly, away from the constant buzz of notifications and obligations. "I keep thinking about what kind of precedent this sets," I told Marcus as we paused at an overlook. "If I donate without her acknowledging what happened between us, am I teaching her that she can treat me however she wants because I'll always be there when she really needs me?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, studying the view of the river cutting through the gorge. "Maybe," he said, "but you're also teaching yourself something about who you are. The question is whether you can live with your choice regardless of how she responds." We hiked in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. The physical exertion felt good after days of mental spinning, and the rhythm of our footsteps seemed to help organize my swirling emotions. By the time we reached the car, I'd made a decision about my next step, even if I hadn't resolved the bigger question. "I'm going to go through the full consultation process," I told Marcus as we drove back toward Portland. "I want all the information before I decide anything. And I think I need to talk to Jessica directly, not through family intermediaries." The consultation at OHSU was more comprehensive than I'd expected. Dr. Williams walked me through detailed anatomical diagrams, explaining exactly how the surgery would work and what my recovery would look like. The social worker, a thoughtful woman named Jennifer, asked probing questions about my family relationships and motivations for considering donation. "I've read your file," Jennifer said during our private session. "I understand there's been some family conflict recently. Can you tell me more about that?" I found myself recounting the Thanksgiving dinner incident, Jessica's public dismissal of my place in the family, and the months of estrangement that followed. Jennifer listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions that helped me articulate feelings I'd barely acknowledged to myself. "How do you think donating a kidney might affect those family dynamics?" she asked. "I honestly don't know," I admitted. "Part of me hopes it might reset things, give us a chance to rebuild our relationship. But another part of me worries that it might just reinforce the pattern where I give and give while she takes everything for granted." Jennifer nodded thoughtfully. "Those are important considerations. Our experience suggests that medical crises can sometimes catalyze positive changes in family relationships, but they can also simply intensify existing patterns. The key is ensuring that your decision is based on your values and what you can live with, not on expectations about how others might change."
The psychological evaluation was equally thorough. Dr. Martinez, a soft-spoken man with decades of experience in transplant psychology, helped me explore my motivations and fears with a depth I hadn't expected. He asked about my childhood relationship with Jessica, the evolution of our family dynamics, and my current support systems. "Tell me about a time when you felt truly valued by your family," he said during one session. The question caught me off guard. I sat in his comfortable office, surrounded by diplomas and plants, struggling to come up with a clear example. There had been moments of connection, certainly, but most of my memories involved performing for approval rather than being accepted for who I was. "I think that's part of the problem," I said slowly. "I've spent so much energy trying to earn my place in the family that I'm not sure I've ever felt unconditionally valued by them." Dr. Martinez made a note in his file. "And how do you think that history might influence your decision about donation?" "I worry that I'm still trying to prove myself worthy of love, that I'm considering the surgery not because it's the right thing to do, but because I think it might finally make them see me as truly family." "That's a very insightful observation," he said. "What would it mean for you to make this decision from a place of strength rather than need for validation?" The question haunted me for days. What would it look like to choose donation, not because I was desperate for family acceptance, but because I genuinely believed it was right? Could I separate my decision from the complicated history of hurt and disappointment that colored every family interaction? Meanwhile, Uncle Pete had been providing updates on Jessica's condition. She'd started dialysis 3 times a week, a grueling process that left her exhausted and nauseated. Her energy levels had plummeted, and she'd had to reduce her hours at work. The vibrant, sharp-tongued sister I remembered was being slowly diminished by kidney failure. "She asks about you sometimes," Pete told me during one of our phone calls. "Wants to know how you're doing, if you're still seeing Marcus, how work is going. She won't admit it, but I think she misses having you in her life." "Missing someone and treating them well are different things," I replied, though I felt a familiar pang at the thought of Jessica asking about me. "I know, and you have every right to protect yourself. I just thought you should know that she's not indifferent to losing your relationship." A week later, I made the call I'd been avoiding. Jessica answered on the second ring, her voice weaker than I remembered, but still recognizably hers. "Alex?" She sounded surprised, almost disbelieving. "Hi, Jess. How are you feeling?" There was a long pause. "Honestly, terrible. This dialysis is brutal, but I'm hanging in there." Another pause. "Uncle Pete said you got tested, that you're a match." "I am." "Alex, Her voice trailed off, and I could hear her struggling with words. "I don't know what to say. After everything that's happened, I can't believe you'd even consider helping me." Here was my opening, the chance to address the elephant that had been sitting between us for months. "What did happen, Jess? Because I'm still trying to understand how we got here." Silence stretched between us across the 45 miles that separated Portland from Salem. When she finally spoke, her voice was small in a way I'd never heard before. "I was awful to you at Thanksgiving. I said things that were cruel and untrue, and I've regretted them every day since." She took a shaky breath. "I think I was jealous, if I'm being honest. You built this amazing life in Portland, you're successful and independent, and I felt left behind. Instead of dealing with my own insecurities, I lashed out at you." The apology I'd been waiting for. Delivered not because she needed my kidney, but because she seemed genuinely understand the harm she'd caused. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. "Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know. Alex, I need you to know that I'm not calling because Uncle Pete told me you were a match. I've
Wanting to reach out for months, but I was too proud and too ashamed. This diagnosis, facing the possibility of dying, it puts things in perspective. Family shouldn't be about performing or proving yourself worthy. You've always been family, and I was wrong to suggest otherwise. We talked for nearly an hour, a real conversation in a way we hadn't had in years. Jessica told me about the fear that kept her awake at night, the way dialysis had changed her relationship with her own body, the future she'd planned that now felt uncertain. I shared the challenges of my job, my relationship with Marcus, the life I'd built in Portland that felt authentic in ways my childhood never had. By the time we hung up, something had shifted between us. Not a complete healing, certainly, but the beginning of honest communication that had been missing for years. For the first time since Uncle Pete's call, I felt like I was making a decision about helping my sister rather than proving something to my family. The next morning, I called Dr. Williams and scheduled the surgery. The surgery was scheduled for Tuesday, June 15th at 6 in the morning, 3 weeks to prepare mentally and physically for a procedure that would permanently alter my body to save my sister's life. Dr. Williams had been thorough in explaining the risks, from the standard surgical complications to the long-term implications of living with one kidney. The statistics were reassuring, but statistics felt abstract when you were the one signing consent forms. Marcus took the day off work to drive me to my preoperative appointment the week before surgery. The hospital's transplant wing hummed with quiet efficiency, nurses and coordinators moving between rooms with practiced calm. Other families sat in waiting areas, some animated with nervous energy, others subdued by the weight of what lay ahead. I wondered how many of them were navigating complicated relationships alongside medical crises. "Are you having second thoughts?" Marcus asked as we waited for my final consultation with Dr. Williams. "Not about helping Jessica," I said, surprised by my own certainty. "But I keep thinking about what comes after. How do we rebuild a relationship that's been broken for so long? What if saving her life doesn't actually heal what's wrong between us?" Before Marcus could respond, a nurse called my name. Dr. Williams reviewed my latest lab results, pronounced everything optimal for surgery, and walked me through the post-operative recovery timeline one final time. The procedure itself would take about 3 hours, with Jessica's surgery happening simultaneously in an adjacent operating room. "Your kidney will be functioning in Jessica's body within minutes of transplantation," Dr. Williams explained. "It's remarkable to witness, actually. One moment she's dependent on dialysis, the next she has normal kidney function. The transformation can be dramatic." That evening, I called my parents for the first time since Thanksgiving. The conversation was stilted at first, both of them clearly unsure how to navigate the months of estrangement while expressing gratitude for my decision. Mom cried when I told her the surgery date, the kind of emotional release that suggested she'd been holding her breath since Jessica's diagnosis. "I know we haven't handled this well," Dad said, his voice gruff with uncharacteristic emotion. "The whole family situation, I mean. Your mother and we've been talking about things we should have said months ago." It wasn't a complete acknowledgement of the dysfunction that had driven me away, but it was more self-reflection than I'd ever heard from either parent. Change, apparently, came slowly to the Morgan family. Jessica called that night too, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "I wanted to thank you again before the surgery," she said, "and I wanted you to know that I've been thinking about everything that's happened between us, not just Thanksgiving, but years of taking you for granted. Jess, you don't need to do this now. Focus on getting ready for the surgery. No, I do need to say this, in case something goes wrong, in case I don't get another chance." She paused, and I could hear her gathering courage. "I've been jealous of you for years, Alex. Jealous of your independence, your career, your ability to build a life on your own terms. Instead of being proud of my sister's accomplishments, I resented them. I made you feel like an outsider because part of me felt like one too, stuck in the same small town while you were out conquering the world." Her honesty was both painful and liberating. "Why didn't you ever tell me that before?" "Because admitting jealousy means admitting you're not satisfied with your own choices. It was easier to criticize your life than examine my own." Jessica's voice grew stronger. "But facing death has a way of clarifying things. I'm proud of who you've become, Alex. I should have been saying that for years instead of tearing you down." We talked until late that night, sharing memories from childhood that felt precious now that we were both adults who had almost lost each other. Jessica told me about dreams she'd put aside when she married young and settled into the life everyone expected. I shared my fears of leaving Salem, the loneliness of building a new life in a new city, the pressure I'd felt to prove that my choices were worthwhile. By the time we said goodnight, something fundamental had shifted between us. Not a magical healing of all past hurts, but a genuine understanding that felt like solid ground for rebuilding our relationship. The night before surgery, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my Portland apartment listening to the city sounds that have become comforting over the past 3 years, and thought about the strange journey that had brought me to this point. 6 months ago, I'd driven away from that Thanksgiving dinner convinced I was better off without my family's dysfunction. Now, I was about to undergo major surgery to save the sister who had rejected me. Marcus stayed over, his presence a steady anchor in the pre-surgical anxiety. We didn't talk much, but his hand in mine spoke volumes about the support that had sustained me through this entire process. Whatever happened with my family, I'd learned the difference between conditional love and genuine partnership. The morning of surgery arrived gray and drizzly, typical Portland weather that somehow felt appropriate for such a momentous day. Marcus drove me to the hospital through quiet streets, both of us lost in our own thoughts. At the registration desk, I signed papers that made everything official and irreversible. Uncle Pete met me in the preoperative waiting area, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by nervous energy. "Jessica's already in prep," he reported. "She wanted me to tell you she's grateful but not scared. Said she knows she's in good hands." My parents arrived shortly after, looking older than I remember and unsure how to approach me. Mom hugged me carefully, as if
Might break, while Dad shook my hand with formal gratitude. The months of estrangement hadn't evaporated, but crisis had a way of temporarily suspending normal family dynamics. "The whole family's in the waiting room," Aunt Carol informed me, bustling in with her usual need to manage situations. "Cousin Emma drove up from Eugene, and your dad's sister came in from Spokane. Everyone wanted to be here for you and Jessica." The irony wasn't lost on me. The family that had made me feel like an outsider was now gathered to support a surgery that proved I was essential to their survival. I felt simultaneously touched by their presence and frustrated by the circumstances that had required such dramatic proof of my worth. A nurse appeared with a wheelchair and a warm smile. "Alex Morgan, it's time." The preoperative area was a maze of curtained spaces where patients waited in various stages of preparation. They settled me into a bed, started an IV, and began the careful process of preparing my body for surgery. The anesthesiologist explained his plan, nurses checked and double-checked my identity and procedure, and gradually the magnitude of what was happening began to feel real. Dr. Williams stopped by for a final check-in. "How are you feeling?" "Nervous but ready," I said honestly. "Is Jessica doing okay?" "She's in excellent spirits. The whole surgical team is excited about this case. It's not often we get to transform 2 lives in one morning." Transform 2 lives. I hadn't thought about it that way, but he was right. Jessica would receive not just a new kidney, but a new chance at life. And I would emerge from this experience with a deeper understanding of my own capacity for generosity and forgiveness. The anesthesia mask descended over my face, and my last conscious thought was wondering whether the person who woke up would still be the same Alex who had driven away from Thanksgiving dinner 6 months ago. I surfaced from anesthesia to the gentle hum of monitors and the soft voices of recovery room nurses. Pain medication kept the surgical site comfortable, but I could feel the absence where my left kidney had been, a strange hollow sensation that would apparently be normal for several weeks. "The surgery went perfectly," Dr. Williams told me when he stopped by an hour later. "Your kidney started producing urine immediately in Jessica's body. Her creatinine levels are already dropping toward normal. It's exactly the outcome we hoped for." Relief flooded through me, stronger than any pain medication. Whatever complicated feelings surrounded our family relationships, I had potentially given my sister decades of healthy life. That simple fact felt worth every moment of anxiety and uncertainty. Marcus appeared in my doorway with a bouquet of sunflowers and the kind of smile that made my heart race even in a hospital bed. "How's our hero feeling?" "Like someone removed an organ from my body," I said, laughing, despite the soreness. "But good.
Really good. He settled into the visitor's chair and took my hand carefully. The waiting room has been crazy. Your whole family's out there, plus half of Salem, apparently. Jessica's doing well, too, according to Uncle Pete. They expect her to be up and walking tomorrow. The next few days passed in a blur of gradual recovery and family visitors. Jessica and I were on the same floor, and once we were both mobile, we spent time together in ways we hadn't since childhood. She looked better each day, color returning to her face as her new kidney efficiently cleaned her blood for the first time in months. "I keep touching my side where your kidney is," she told me during one visit. "It's surreal knowing that part of you is literally keeping me alive." We talked about practical things, her recovery timeline and my return to work, but also about deeper questions that the surgery had forced us both to confront. What kind of relationship did we want to build going forward? How could we honor the magnitude of what had happened between us, while also moving beyond the past hurts that had divided us? "I don't want this to be the thing that defines our relationship forever. I'll never stop being grateful, but I also don't want you to feel like I owe you something so huge that we can't just be sisters again." Her awareness of the potential dynamic impressed me. The Jessica I remembered would have been comfortable with perpetual gratitude if it meant avoiding the harder work of actual relationship building. Our parents visited daily, sometimes together, sometimes separately. Dad brought crossword puzzles and sat quietly working through clues while I dozed. Mom fussed over both of us with the intensity of someone making up for months of worry. They seemed different somehow, more appreciative and less likely to take family connections for granted. Uncle Pete became our informal family coordinator, managing visitors and updates with his characteristic diplomatic skill. "You know," he said during one visit, "I've never seen your parents more proud of anyone than they are of you right now. They may not always know how to show it, but they recognize what you've done." Pride from my parents felt unfamiliar, but welcome. For most of my life, their approval seemed contingent on conforming to expectations I couldn't meet. Now they were proud of me for making a choice that reflected my own values rather than their preferences. A week after surgery, Dr. Williams cleared me to go home to Portland. My recovery was progressing exactly as expected, and Jessica's new kidney was functioning beautifully. She would need lifelong immunosuppressive medications and regular monitoring, but the immediate crisis was over. "This is the part where real life starts again," Jessica said as we said goodbye in the hospital corridor. "I want you to know that I'm committed to being the sister you deserve, not just the grateful recipient of your kidney." Back in my apartment overlooking the Willamette River, I began the slow process of healing and reflection. The physical recovery would take several weeks, but the emotional processing felt like it might continue for years. I had learned something profound about my own capacity for love and forgiveness, about the difference between enabling dysfunction and offering genuine help. Marcus took excellent care of me during those first weeks home, bringing soup and books and patient companionship. We talked extensively about what the experience had taught us both about family, sacrifice, and the complexity of human relationships. "Do you regret it?" he asked one evening as we watched the sunset from my small balcony. I considered the question seriously. My body was healing, Jessica was thriving, and our family relationships were slowly improving. But more importantly, I had made a choice that aligned with my deepest values, regardless of how others responded. "No," I said with certainty. "I don't regret it at all." 6 months after the surgery, I was back to
Full activity at TechFlow Solutions, leading our most ambitious project yet. The scar from the laparoscopic procedure had faded to a thin line along my side, barely visible unless you knew where to look. But the internal changes from that experience ran much deeper than any physical mark. Jessica called every Sunday now, a ritual that had evolved naturally from the intensive recovery period. Her voice carried an energy I hadn't heard in years, the vitality of someone whose body was functioning properly for the first time in months. But more than physical health, there was an emotional lightness to our conversations that felt like discovering a new relationship with someone I'd known my entire life. "I got the promotion," she announced during one of these calls, barely containing her excitement. "Senior marketing coordinator, and they're letting me work remotely 3 days a week. I can finally take that graphic design course I've been talking about for years."
The old Jessica might have downplayed such accomplishments or found reasons why they weren't as significant as they seemed. This version celebrated her victories and made plans for the future with genuine enthusiasm. Her brush with mortality had unlocked ambitions she'd kept hidden, even from herself. "I'm proud of you," I told her, meaning it completely. "You've built something amazing from what could have been a devastating situation." "Speaking of building things," Jessica said, her tone shifting slightly, "I wanted to run something by you. David and I have been talking about moving to Portland. Not to be close to you specifically, although that would be wonderful, but because I want to work for a larger company with more opportunities. Would that be weird for you?" The question caught me off guard. 6 months ago, the thought of Jessica moving to my carefully constructed Portland life would have felt like an invasion. Now it sounded like an opportunity to continue rebuilding our relationship without the geographical distance that had always made sustained connection difficult. "It wouldn't be weird at all," I said honestly. "I think I'd like having you closer, actually. We're different people than we were before all this happened." Marcus had been listening from the kitchen where he was preparing dinner, and he smiled at my response. He'd watched our relationship evolve from bitter estrangement through medical crisis to genuine sisterhood, and he understood better than anyone how much work had gone into that transformation. Our family dinners had resumed, though they looked very different now. Instead of the formal affairs at my parents' house in Salem, we often met at restaurants in Portland or at Jessica and David's apartment. The conversations flowed more naturally, without the undercurrent of judgment and performance that had characterized our previous gatherings. During one such dinner at a small Italian place in the Pearl District, Dad surprised everyone by raising his wine glass in a toast. "To Alex," he said, his voice carrying uncharacteristic emotion, "for showing us what real family loyalty looks like, even when we hadn't earned it." Mom wiped her eyes with her napkin, and Jessica squeezed my hand under the table. These moments of acknowledgement meant more to me than any grand gestures could have. My parents were learning to express appreciation in ways they never had when I was growing up, and while it couldn't erase years of feeling misunderstood, it provided a foundation for building something healthier going forward. The biggest change, though, was in my relationship with myself. The experience of making such a consequential decision based on my own values rather than family expectations had taught me something profound about autonomy and self-respect. I no longer felt the desperate need to prove my worth to people who had known me my entire life. Instead, I operated from a place of security about who I was and what I had to offer. This new confidence showed up in unexpected ways. When TechFlow's CEO approached me about relocating to manage their new Seattle office, I negotiated terms that reflected my actual value rather than accepting whatever was offered. When Marcus and I started seriously discussing marriage, I approached those conversations as an equal partner rather than someone grateful to be chosen. When family members made requests of my time or energy, I evaluated them based on what worked for my life rather than automatic obligation. Uncle Pete noticed a change during a coffee meeting in downtown Portland. "You seem different," he observed as we sat in the familiar surroundings of Stumptown. "More settled in yourself, if that makes sense." "The whole experience changed my perspective on a lot of things," I admitted. I realized I'd been living my life trying to earn acceptance from people whose approval shouldn't have been conditional in the first place. Donating the kidney wasn't about proving anything to the family. It was about doing something that aligned with who I wanted to be. Pete nodded thoughtfully. "Jessica's different too. More honest about what she wants, less worried about what everyone thinks. Maybe almost losing each other forced you both to be more authentic." His observation resonated deeply. Jessica and I had both been performing versions of ourselves that we thought our family wanted, rather than being who we actually were. The medical crisis had stripped away those performances and forced us to interact from a place of genuine vulnerability. A year after the surgery, Marcus proposed during a weekend trip to the Oregon coast. We were walking along Cannon Beach at sunset when he stopped and pulled out a ring that caught the golden light perfectly. He said,
I want to build a life with someone who has the courage to make difficult choices for the right reasons. Will you marry me?" I said yes without hesitation, not because I was desperate to be married, but because Marcus represented the kind of partnership I'd learned I deserved. Our relationship was built on mutual respect and shared values, rather than convenience or family expectations. Jessica was the first person I called with the news, and her excitement was infectious. "I'm so happy for you," she said, and I could hear genuine joy in her voice. "Marcus is perfect for you. When's the wedding? Can I help plan anything?" I promise not to make it all about me. The fact that she could joke about her own past behavior while offering genuine support showed how much growth had happened on both sides. We were building a relationship based on who we were now, rather than who we'd been during our most difficult periods. The wedding planning process became an unexpected opportunity for further family healing. Jessica threw herself into helping with details, channeling her marketing skills into creating beautiful invitations and coordinating vendors. Mom and I worked together on flowers and decorations, discovering that we actually enjoyed each other's company when we had a shared purpose like this.
Weren't navigating complicated emotional dynamics. Dad walked me down the aisle on a perfect September day, his pride visible to everyone in attendance. Uncle Pete officiated the ceremony, having gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion. Jessica's maid of honor speech brought tears to everyone's eyes as she talked about the courage it takes to love people even when they've disappointed you. "My sister taught me that family isn't just about blood or shared history," she said, looking directly at me. "It's about choosing to show up for each other, especially when it's hard." Alex showed up for me when I didn't deserve it, and that changed everything about how I understand love and forgiveness. During the reception, I found myself observing the easy interactions between family members who had once seemed incapable of genuine connection. Mom danced with Marcus while chatting enthusiastically about his work. Dad and Uncle Pete told embarrassing stories about my childhood to anyone who would listen. Jessica and David mingled effortlessly with my Portland friends. The geographical and cultural divides that had once seemed insurmountable, now completely irrelevant. 2 years post-surgery, Jessica did move to Portland, taking a position with a sustainable fashion company that aligned with values she'd discovered during her recovery. She and David bought a house in the Beaumont, Wilshire neighborhood, close enough for regular dinners, but far enough to maintain healthy independence. Having my sister nearby transformed both of our lives in ways we hadn't anticipated. We developed traditions like weekly farmers market trips and monthly hiking adventures. Jessica became genuinely close with Marcus, appreciating his steady support and dry sense of humor. I got to know David better, discovering that he was thoughtful and ambitious in ways that hadn't been apparent during brief family gatherings. Our parents visited Portland regularly now, staying with Jessica and David, but spending time with both of their children. They seemed to genuinely enjoy the city, taking advantage of the cultural opportunities and natural beauty that had drawn me here in the first place. These visits felt relaxed in ways our previous family interactions never had. "It's like we're all finally ourselves around each other," Mom observed during one of these trips. "No more walking on eggshells or pretending things are fine when they're not." The medical follow-ups continued to show excellent results. Jessica's transplanted kidney functioned perfectly, and my remaining kidney had adapted beautifully to handling the full workload. Dr. Williams pronounced us both model cases during our annual checkups, often using our story as encouragement for other families facing similar decisions. 3 years after the surgery, I received a call from Dr. Williams about participating in a medical conference panel on living donation. "We'd like you and Jessica to speak about the family dynamics aspect," he explained. "Your story illustrates how medical crises can catalyze positive relationship changes when people approach them with openness and honesty." The conference was held at a resort in Bend, Oregon, bringing together transplant professionals from across the Pacific Northwest. Jessica and I sat on a panel with other donor-recipient pairs, sharing our experience with an audience of doctors, nurses, social workers, and psychologists. "The most important thing we learned," I told the audience, "is that donating an organ doesn't automatically fix relationship problems, but it can create space for honest conversations that might not happen otherwise.
The key is being willing to do the emotional work alongside the medical procedures. Jessica added, almost dying forced me to confront how I'd been treating the people I loved. Alex's willingness to help me despite our problems showed me what unconditional love actually looks like. But we both had to choose to rebuild our relationship from that foundation. After our presentation, several audience members approached us with their own family stories. Medical crises, we learned, often revealed both the best and the worst in family relationships. Some families grew closer through shared adversity, while others fractured under the pressure of life-threatening illness. That evening, Jessica and I sat on the resort's deck overlooking the Cascade Mountains, reflecting on how far we had traveled from that Thanksgiving dinner when she had declared me not really family. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't been a match?" Jessica asked. "Or if you decided not to donate?" I'd considered this question many times over the years. "I think you would have found another way to survive," I said honestly. "You're stronger than you gave yourself credit for back then. And I think we eventually would have worked through our problems, maybe just not as dramatically." Jessica smiled. "I'm glad it happened the way it did, though. Not the getting sick part, obviously. But having something that forced us to be completely honest with each other, I don't think either of us would have had the courage to address our relationship issues without a crisis to motivate us." She was probably right. The comfortable distance of estrangement might have stretched indefinitely if kidney failure hadn't created an urgency that demanded resolution. Now, 5 years later, I can say with certainty that donating my kidney was one of the best decisions I've ever made. Not because it earned me family acceptance or proved my worth, but because it demonstrated to myself that I could act from love rather than fear, that I could make difficult choices based on my values rather than my wounds. Jessica and I have built a relationship that neither of us could have imagined during those difficult years before her illness. We're genuine friends now, not just sisters bound by obligation. We support each other's dreams, celebrate each other's victories, and navigate challenges together with the kind of partnership that transcends family roles. Our parents have become more involved grandparents to Jessica and David's daughter, born 2 years ago, and they're excited about the prospect of more grandchildren when Marcus and I decide to start our family. The multi-generational dynamics that once felt fraught with judgment and expectation now feel supportive and celebratory. Last month, I ran into Aunt Carol at the grocery store during a visit to Salem. She hugged me warmly and said something that would have shocked me years ago. "You know, Alex, you've always been the strongest one in this family. It just took the rest of us a while to recognize it." Perhaps that's the most profound change of all. I no longer need their recognition to know my own worth, but receiving it feels like a gift rather than a validation I desperately required. The scar from my surgery has faded to almost nothing now, visible only as a faint line when I look for it deliberately. But the internal changes from that,
The experience continued to shape how I move through the world. I approach relationships with clearer boundaries and deeper capacity for both forgiveness and self-protection. I make decisions based on my own moral compass rather than external expectations. I've learned the difference between conditional love and genuine care. Sometimes people ask if I have any regrets about the donation, if living with one kidney has caused any problems or limitations. The answer is simple: none whatsoever. My remaining kidney functions perfectly, my energy levels are normal, and I can do everything I could do before. But more importantly, I sleep peacefully knowing that I acted from the best part of myself during one of the most challenging periods of my life. Jessica and I text regularly now, sharing everything from work frustrations to weekend plans to funny memes that remind us of inside jokes. Last week, she sent me a photo of her latest art project, a painting she'd completed in the graphic design course she finally had the courage to take. It was beautiful, full of color and movement and hope. "Thank you," her message read, "not just for the kidney, but for showing me what it means to be brave." But I think she's got it backwards. Jessica showed me what it means to be brave by acknowledging her mistakes, apologizing sincerely, and committing to change. She taught me that people can grow beyond their worst moments if they're willing to do the difficult work of transformation.
What would you do if someone who had rejected you suddenly needed something only you could provide? Would you let past hurts determine present choices? Or would you find the courage to respond from your highest self? Sometimes the most radical act of love is extending grace to people who haven't earned it, not because they deserve it, but because it reflects who you choose to be. The family that once made me feel like an outsider now feels like home in the truest sense. Not because blood makes us family, but because we've chosen to love each other through our imperfections and create something beautiful from our brokenness. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, 7 years after the surgery that had changed everything. I was drinking coffee in the kitchen of the house Marcus and I had bought in Portland's Irvington neighborhood when I noticed the official-looking envelope among the usual bills and advertisements. The return address read National Kidney Foundation, and my name was printed in careful block letters across the front. Inside was an invitation to receive their Outstanding Living Donor Award at their annual gala in San Francisco. The nomination had come from Dr. Williams and the transplant team at Oregon Health and Science University, citing not just my donation, but the follow-up work Jessica and I had done speaking at medical conferences and supporting other families facing similar decisions. "Marcus," I called to him upstairs where he was getting ready for work, "you need to see this." He came down in his half-buttoned dress shirt, still holding his tie, and read the letter over my shoulder. "Alex, this is incredible. A national award? They want to fly us both to San Francisco and put us up at the Fairmont." I read the letter again, hardly believing it was real. In the 7 years since the donation, Jessica and I had settled into a comfortable routine of annual checkups and occasional speaking engagements. The dramatic transformation of our first few years had evolved into something quieter, but no less meaningful. We were simply sisters now, with all the ordinary closeness and occasional friction that implied. Jessica lived 6 blocks away in a craftsman bungalow she and David had renovated themselves. She'd discovered a talent for interior design that complemented her marketing background, and she'd started a small consultancy helping sustainable businesses create beautiful, environmentally conscious spaces. David had joined her in the business after leaving his corporate job, and they'd built something that reflected both their values and their skills. The easy integration of our lives still amazed me sometimes. Jessica would text me photos of potential fabric samples for a client's office, asking for my opinion on color combinations. I'd call her when I was stuck on a particularly challenging software integration problem at work, knowing she'd ask the kind of questions that helped me think through solutions. We celebrated birthdays together, complained about our parents' increasing attempts to manage our lives from Salem, and navigated the ordinary challenges of adult siblings who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Our parents had embraced grandparenthood with enthusiasm that surprised everyone. Mom had mellowed considerably since Jessica and David's daughter Emma was born 3 years ago, channeling her need to nurture into more appropriate outlets than managing her adult children's lives. Dad had discovered a talent for building elaborate play structures and reading bedtime stories with theatrical flair that delighted his granddaughter. The family dynamics that had once felt suffocating now felt like a comfortable backdrop for our individual lives. We gathered for holidays and birthdays, but the gatherings felt celebratory rather than obligatory. Uncle Pete remained the family's unofficial coordinator, organizing camping trips and anniversary parties with the same diplomatic skill he'd once used to navigate our various crises. When I called Jessica to tell her about the award nomination, she was in the middle of a client consultation, but immediately put the call on hold. "Are you serious right now? The National Kidney Foundation wants to give you an award?" Her excitement was infectious, and I could hear her explaining the situation to her client in the background. "Sorry, my sister just found out she's getting a national award for saving my life. Can we reschedule for tomorrow?" We met for lunch that afternoon at our favorite spot in the Alberta Arts District, a small cafe that served excellent salads and had outdoor seating where we could watch the neighborhood's creative energy unfold around us. Jessica brought David, who hugged me with the easy affection that had developed between us over the years.
This is huge, Alex, David said as we settled at a table with our food. You realize how many living donors there are in the country? Getting recognized nationally means your story has impact beyond our family. He was right, though I'd never thought about it in those terms. The speaking engagements Jessica and I had done at medical conferences had become more frequent over the years, as doctors and social workers recognized the value of hearing from donor-recipient pairs who had navigated complex family dynamics successfully. We'd spoken to audiences in Seattle, Denver, Phoenix, and Atlanta, always emphasizing that donation was a deeply personal choice that shouldn't be influenced by guilt, obligation, or anyone's expectations other than the donor and recipient themselves.
Guilt or family pressure. The application process is pretty involved, I told them, reading through the detailed packet that had accompanied the initial letter. They want essays, medical records, references from multiple sources, and a comprehensive interview process. It's like applying for a very prestigious, very personal scholarship. Jessica leaned across the table and grabbed my hand. Whatever you need from me, whatever documentation or interviews or references, I'm completely available. This recognition isn't just for you. It's acknowledgement of everything we've built together since the surgery. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into the application process with the same thoroughness I'd brought to complex projects at work. The essays required deep reflection on motivations, outcomes, and lessons learned. One prompt asked about the most challenging aspect of donation decision-making. Another wanted me to describe how the experience had influenced my perspective on family relationships and personal responsibility. Writing about the Thanksgiving dinner where Jessica had declared me not really family felt strange after all these years. The pain of that moment had faded into something more like curiosity about the people we'd been then, and gratitude for the growth that had followed. I tried to capture both the difficulty of that period and the unexpected gifts that had emerged from our crisis. Marcus helped me refine the essays, his editor's eye catching awkward phrasing and suggesting clearer ways to express complicated emotions. "You should be proud of this," he said after reading my final draft. "It's honest about how hard things were without being dramatic, and it shows genuine insight into what made the difference in your family's healing." The medical documentation was straightforward but sobering. 7 years of follow-up appointments, blood tests, and imaging studies created a comprehensive picture of two people whose health had been permanently intertwined by surgical intervention. Jessica's kidney function remained excellent, and my remaining kidney continued to handle its increased workload without any signs of stress or decline. Dr. Williams provided a detailed letter of recommendation that made me cry when I read it. He described not just the medical success of our transplant, but the emotional intelligence Jessica and I had brought to the entire process. "This donor-recipient pair exemplifies the best outcomes possible in living donation," he wrote. "Their commitment to honest communication, mutual respect, and ongoing relationship building has created a template that we regularly share with other families facing similar decisions." The interview process took place via video conference with a panel of foundation board members, medical professionals, and previous award recipients. They asked thoughtful questions about my decision-making process, the role my support systems had played, and what advice I would give to potential donors considering similar choices. "What would you say to someone whose family relationships are complicated, like yours were?" asked Dr. Sarah Chen, a transplant surgeon from Houston who had received the same award 3 years earlier for her own donation to a colleague. "I'd tell them that donation can't fix broken relationships," I answered honestly, "but it can create space for healing if both people are willing to do the emotional work. The medical procedure is actually the easy part. The hard part is being vulnerable enough to rebuild trust and connection." Another panelist, a social worker from the Foundation's Family Services Department, asked about long-term impacts. 7 years later, how has this experience continued to influence your life?
I thought carefully before answering. It taught me the difference between people-pleasing and genuine generosity. Before the donation, I was always trying to earn acceptance from people whose approval was conditional. The kidney donation was the first time I made a major life decision based entirely on my own values rather than what I thought others expected from me. That shift in perspective has influenced every significant choice I've made since. The notification call came on a Friday afternoon in May. I was in the middle of a project status meeting when my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me excuse myself from the meeting and answer. Alex Morgan? This is Janet Rodriguez from the National Kidney Foundation. I'm calling with some wonderful news. My heart started racing before she even finished the sentence. I'd been selected to receive the Outstanding Living Donor Award at their annual gala in San Francisco. The foundation would cover all expenses for Marcus and me to attend the ceremony in San Francisco, and they wanted to feature our story in their annual magazine and on their website. I walked back into the conference room where my colleagues were still discussing quarterly projections, but I couldn't focus on anything they were saying. The recognition felt surreal, like something that happened to other people rather than a software project manager from Portland who had simply tried to do the right thing during a family crisis. Jessica was my first call after work. She answered on the first ring, which meant she'd been waiting to hear from me. "Well?" she demanded without even saying hello. "I got it!" I said, and immediately heard her shriek of excitement loud enough that David asked from the background what was happening. "We got it," she corrected me. "This award recognizes both of us, everything we've built together. When is the ceremony? What do you wear to something like this? Should we coordinate outfits?" Her enthusiasm made me laugh. Some things never changed. Jessica still approached every significant event with detailed planning and the assumption that presentation mattered as much as substance. The months leading up to the gala flew by in a blur of preparation and anticipation. The foundation sent a professional photographer to Portland for a photo shoot that would accompany the magazine article. Jessica and I spent an afternoon being posed in various locations around the city, from the Rose Garden to the riverfront to the hospital where our surgeries had taken place. "This feels so strange," Jessica murmured during a break between shots. 7 years ago, we could barely have a civil conversation, and now we're being photographed as an example of successful family healing. The photographer overheard and asked us to talk about that transformation while he captured candid shots. "What changed between you?" he asked as he adjusted his camera settings. "We both stopped performing and started being honest," I said, looking at Jessica. "The crisis forced us to drop our defenses and actually communicate instead of just protecting ourselves from each other." Jessica nodded. "And we learned that love isn't about never disappointing each other."
Guilt or family pressure. The application process is pretty involved, I told them, reading through the detailed packet that had accompanied the initial letter. They want essays, medical records, references from multiple sources, and a comprehensive interview process. It's like applying for a very prestigious, very personal scholarship. Jessica leaned across the table and grabbed my hand. "Whatever you need from me, whatever documentation or interviews or references, I'm completely available. This recognition isn't just for you. It's acknowledgement of everything we've built together since the surgery." Over the following weeks, I threw myself into the application process with the same thoroughness I brought to complex projects at work. The essays required deep reflection on motivations, outcomes, and lessons learned. One prompt asked about the most challenging aspect of donation decision-making. Another wanted me to describe how the experience had influenced my perspective on family relationships and personal responsibility. Writing about the Thanksgiving dinner where Jessica had declared me not really family felt strange after all these years. The pain of that moment had faded into something more like curiosity about the people we'd been then, and gratitude for the growth that had followed. I try to capture both the difficulty of that period and the unexpected gifts that had emerged from our crisis.
Marcus helped me refine the essays, his editor's eye catching awkward phrasing and suggesting clearer ways to express complicated emotions. "You should be proud of this," he said, after reading my final draft. "It's honest about how hard things were without being dramatic, and it shows genuine insight into what made the difference in your family's healing." The medical documentation was straightforward but sobering. 7 years of follow-up appointments, blood tests, and imaging studies created a comprehensive picture of two people whose health had been permanently intertwined by surgical intervention. Jessica's kidney function remained excellent, and my remaining kidney continued to handle its increased workload without any signs of stress or decline. Dr. Williams provided a detailed letter of recommendation that made me cry when I read it. He described not just the medical success of our transplant, but the emotional intelligence Jessica and I had brought to the entire process. "This donor-recipient pair exemplifies the best outcomes possible in living donation," he wrote. "Their commitment to honest communication, mutual respect, and ongoing relationship building has created a template that we regularly share with other families facing similar decisions." The interview process took place via video conference with a panel of Foundation board members, medical professionals, and previous award recipients. They asked thoughtful questions about my decision-making process, the role my support systems had played, and what advice I would give to potential donors considering similar choices. "What would you say to someone whose family relationships are complicated, like yours were?" asked Dr. Sarah Chen, a transplant surgeon from Houston who had received the same award 3 years earlier for her own donation to a colleague. "I'd tell them that donation can't fix broken relationships, but it can create space for healing if both people are willing to do the emotional work. The medical procedure is actually the easy part. The hard part is being vulnerable enough to rebuild trust and connection." Another panelist, a social worker from the Foundation's Family Services Department, asked about long-term impacts. "7 years later, how has this experience continued to influence your life?" I thought carefully before answering. "It taught me the difference between people-pleasing and genuine generosity. Before the donation, I was always trying to earn acceptance from people whose approval was conditional. The kidney donation was the first time I made a major life decision based entirely on my own values rather than what I thought others expected from me. That shift in perspective has influenced every significant choice I've made since." The notification call came on a Friday afternoon in May. I was in the middle of a project status meeting when my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me excuse myself from the meeting and answer. "Alex Morgan? This is Janet Rodriguez from the National Kidney Foundation. I'm calling with some wonderful news." My heart started racing before she even finished the sentence. I'd been selected to receive the Outstanding Living Donor Award at their annual gala in September. The foundation would cover all expenses for Marcus and I to attend the ceremony in San Francisco, and they wanted to feature our story in their annual magazine and on their website. I walked back into the conference room where my colleagues were still discussing quarterly projections, but I couldn't focus on anything they were saying. The recognition felt surreal, like something that happened to other people rather than a software project manager from Portland who had simply tried to do the right thing during a family crisis. Jessica was my first call after work. She answered on the first ring, which meant she'd been waiting to hear from me. "Well," I said, and immediately heard her shriek of excitement loud enough that David asked from the background what was happening. "We got it," she corrected me. "This award recognizes both of us, everything we've built together. When is the ceremony? What do you wear to something like this? Should we coordinate outfits?" Her enthusiasm made me laugh. Some things never changed. Jessica still approached every significant event with detailed planning and the assumption that presentation mattered as much as substance. The months leading up to the gala flew by in a blur of preparation and anticipation. The foundation sent a professional photographer to Portland for a photo shoot that would accompany the magazine article. Jessica and I spent an afternoon being posed in various locations around the city, from the Rose Garden to the riverfront to the hospital where our surgeries had taken place. "This feels so strange," Jessica murmured during a break between shots. 7 years ago, we could barely have a civil conversation, and now we're being photographed as an example of successful family healing. The photographer overheard and asked us to talk about that transformation while he captured candid shots.
"What changed between you?" he asked as he adjusted his camera settings. "We both stopped performing and started being honest," I said, looking at Jessica. "The crisis forced us to drop our defenses and actually communicate instead of just protecting ourselves from each other." Jessica nodded. "And we learned that love isn't about never disappointing each other."
Gathering we'd ever had. Now I wonder if it was actually the best, because it forced everything into the open where it could finally be addressed. His perspective surprised me. I'd always thought of that dinner as the low point we'd had to recover from. But maybe he was right. Maybe Jessica's cruel honesty had been necessary to break through years of polite dysfunction and create space for genuine relationship. A year after receiving the award, Jessica and I were invited to speak at the Foundation's National Conference in Chicago. The audience included not just medical professionals, but donor-recipient pairs from across the country, people at various stages of their own transplant journeys. During the question and answer session following our presentation, a young man in the back raised his hand. "I've been considering donating to my brother, but our relationship is really complicated. How do you know if someone deserves that kind of sacrifice?" Jessica and I looked at each other, recognizing the anguish in his voice that we'd both felt years earlier. "That's exactly the wrong question," Jessica answered gently. "It's not about whether someone deserves your kidney. It's about whether donation aligns with your values and what you can live with. My sister didn't save my life because I deserved it. She did it because that's who she is." I added, "And you can't donate a kidney to fix a relationship or earn someone's love. Those things have to be worked on separately from the medical decision. The kidney donation created an opportunity for Jessica and me to rebuild our relationship, but we both had to choose to do that work." After the conference, we received dozens of emails from people who had been in that audience, sharing their own family stories and asking for advice about navigating complex relationship dynamics alongside medical crises. Each story reminded me of how many families struggle with the intersection of love, obligation, and personal boundaries. Now, 10 years after that first surgery, Jessica and I have developed what we call the Morgan model for our speaking engagements. It's a framework for separating medical decisions from relationship repair, for making choices based on personal values rather than guilt or expectation, and for maintaining healthy boundaries even within the most intimate family connections. The model has 3 core principles. Medical decisions should be made independently of relationship dynamics. Relationship repair requires mutual commitment and honest communication. An ongoing connection depends on respect for individual autonomy rather than obligation or guilt. We've shared this framework at conferences in 12 states, and the feedback consistently emphasizes how helpful it is to have practical tools for navigating these complex situations. Medical professionals tell us they regularly refer families to our recorded presentations when they're struggling with similar dynamics, but perhaps the most meaningful validation comes from our ordinary life together. Jessica and I text nearly every day, share holidays and birthdays and random Tuesday evenings, celebrate each other's victories, and provide support during challenges. Emma, now 6, considers me her favorite aunt and Marcus her favorite uncle. When she draws pictures of our family, she always includes both our houses, connected by a rainbow that she says represents love. Last month, Jessica called to tell me she was pregnant again. "I wanted you to be the first to know," she said, her voice bubbling with excitement. "And I wanted to ask if you and Marcus would consider being the baby's godparents." The request touched me deeply, not because of the honor involved, but because of what it represented. Jessica wanted Marcus and me to be official parts of her child's life, to have recognized roles in the family she was building. It was a far cry from the sister who had once questioned whether I was really family at all. "Of course," I told her. "We'd be honored." As I hung up the phone, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this point. From bitter estrangement through medical crisis to genuine sisterhood, we'd navigated every possible variation of family relationship. The kidney donation had been just one moment in a longer story of 2 people learning how to love each other authentically.
The scar from my surgery is barely visible now, a thin line that most people would never notice. But the internal changes from that experience continue to shape how I move through the world. I approach relationships with clearer boundaries and deeper capacity for both generosity and self-protection. I make decisions based on my own moral compass rather than others' expectations. I've learned the difference between conditional love and genuine care. Marcus and I are talking about starting our own family soon, and I find myself imagining the stories we'll tell our children about the importance of courage, honesty, and unconditional love. Jessica's children will grow up knowing that family means choosing to show up for each other, even when it's difficult, even when you've been hurt before. Sometimes people ask if I would make the same choice again, knowing everything I know now about the challenges and rewards that followed. The answer is always the same. Absolutely. Not because everything turned out perfectly, but because the choice reflected who I wanted to be in the world, regardless of how others responded. The National Kidney Foundation Award sits on our mantelpiece now, catching the light from our living room windows. But it's not the crystal sculpture that reminds me of what we accomplished. It's Jessica's texts about her pregnancy cravings, Emma's drawings of our rainbow family, the easy way David hugs me hello at family gatherings, and the peaceful feeling I have when I think about the people I love. What would you do if someone who had rejected you needed something only you could provide? The answer, I've learned, isn't about them at all. It's about who you choose to be when life presents you with the opportunity to act from love rather than hurt, to build rather than tear down, to heal rather than hold grudges. The family that once made me feel like an outsider now feels like home in the truest sense. Not because blood makes us family, but because we've chosen to love each other through our imperfections and create something beautiful from our shared commitment to growth and forgiveness. The phone call that would change everything came on a crisp October morning, 15 years after Jessica first received my kidney. I was in my home office, reviewing quarterly reports for the tech consulting firm Marcus and I had launched 3 years earlier, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Something about the area code made me pause, a vague recognition that I couldn't quite place. "Is this Alex Morgan?" The voice was of a young woman, hesitant but determined. "Yes, this is Alex. How can I help you?" "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm calling because I read your
story in the Kidney Foundation magazine, and I think you might be able to help me. I'm facing a situation with my family that sounds very similar to what you went through with your sister." Over the next hour, Sarah told me a story that felt like looking into a mirror from decades past. Her older brother had always been the family favorite, the golden child who could do no wrong, despite a pattern of financial irresponsibility and emotional manipulation. When he developed kidney disease at 35, the family immediately expected Sarah to get tested as a potential donor, despite years of him treating her as an afterthought in family gatherings and decisions. "The thing is," Sarah said, her voice thick with frustration, "I want to help him because I love him, but I also feel like if I donate my kidney without addressing how he's treated me, I'm just enabling more of the same behavior. My parents keep saying this isn't the time for petty family grievances, but these grievances don't feel petty to me." As she spoke, I found myself transported back to that coffee shop where Uncle Pete had first told me about Jessica's diagnosis. The familiar weight of family obligation wrestling with personal boundaries, the guilt about setting conditions when someone's life hung in the balance, the fear that helping might reinforce the very dynamics that had caused so much pain. "Sarah," I said gently, "what you're feeling makes complete sense. The fact that your brother is sick doesn't automatically erase years of problematic behavior, and pretending otherwise won't lead to genuine healing for either of you." We talked for another 30 minutes, and by the end of the call, I realized something profound had happened. 15 years after struggling with my own impossible choice, I had become the person I desperately needed back then, someone who understood the complexity of loving difficult family members while maintaining personal integrity. Sarah's call was the first of many that would come over the following months.
Word had somehow spread through online support groups and medical networks that I was available to talk with people facing similar dilemmas. The calls came from across the country, each person carrying their own version of the same fundamental question: how do you help someone who has hurt you without losing yourself in the process? There was Michael from Denver, whose sister had stolen money from their grandmother but now needed a liver transplant. There was Patricia from Atlanta, whose son had been verbally abusive for years but was facing heart failure. There was David from Seattle, whose father had abandoned the family when David was 12 but was now reaching out for help with end-stage kidney disease. Each story was unique in its details, but remarkably similar in its emotional landscape. Family members who had been pushed away or taken for granted suddenly becoming essential when medical crisis struck. The collision between unconditional love and basic self-respect. The question of whether helping someone medically meant accepting their behavior permanently. Marcus found me one evening sitting at our kitchen table with a notebook full of names and phone numbers, trying to organize the growing network of people who had reached out for guidance. "You know," he said, settling into the chair across from me with 2 cups of tea, "this is becoming more than informal phone calls. You're providing a service that doesn't exist anywhere else." He was right. Medical teams were excellent at evaluating physical compatibility and surgical risks, but they weren't equipped to help families navigate the complex emotional dynamics that often surrounded organ donation decisions. Social workers could provide resources and referrals, but they rarely had personal experience with the specific challenges of being a potential donor in a complicated family situation. What if we formalized this somehow, created an actual program to help people work through these decisions in a structured way? The idea intrigued me, but it also felt overwhelming. I'd built a successful consulting business by helping companies implement complex software systems, not by providing emotional guidance to families in crisis. Still, the phone calls kept coming, and each conversation reminded me of how desperately I'd needed exactly this kind of support when I was making my own decision about Jessica. Jessica herself had become an unexpected partner in these informal counseling sessions. When callers expressed concerns about being taken advantage of or having their sacrifice go unappreciated, I often conferenced her in to share her perspective as someone who had received both the medical gift and the emotional wake-up call that came with it. "The hardest part for me," she told a woman whose alcoholic brother needed a liver transplant, "was realizing that my sister's willingness to help me didn't automatically fix our relationship. She gave me a second chance at life, but I had to earn the second chance at being her sister. Those are 2 completely different things." Her insight consistently surprised me. The Jessica who emerged from our crisis had developed a wisdom about family relationships that she shared generously with strangers who were struggling with similar challenges. She had learned to separate medical need from emotional manipulation, to express gratitude without guilt-tripping, and to work on relationship repair as an ongoing process rather than a one-time event. 6 months after Sarah's initial call, Marcus and I made the decision to establish the Morgan Family Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting families navigating the emotional complexities of living organ donation. We used our business connections to secure initial funding, our medical contacts to develop educational materials, and our personal experience to create frameworks that could help others. The Foundation's signature program became our Family Relationship Assessment, a structured process that helped potential donors separate medical decisions from relationship dynamics. Working with Dr. Williams and other transplant professionals, we developed tools that allowed families to address underlying issues while making informed choices about donation. The assessment included individual counseling for potential donors, family mediation sessions when appropriate, and ongoing support throughout the decision-making process. Most importantly, it normalized the idea that having reservations about helping difficult family members was a sign of healthy boundaries rather than selfishness. Our first official client was Sarah Mitchell, the young woman whose call had started this entire journey. She flew to Portland with her brother and parents for a week-long intensive program that included medical consultations, psychological evaluations, and structured family therapy sessions.
Behavior has affected me, Sarah told us during her individual session,
Every time I tried to bring up past issues, my parents shut me down by saying family should be unconditional. But unconditional love doesn't mean accepting unconditional mistreatment. Through the assessment process, Sarah's family began to understand that her hesitation about donation wasn't rooted in spite or selfishness, but in legitimate concerns about enabling patterns that had hurt multiple family members over the years. Her brother, faced with the possibility that his actions might cost him his only viable donor, began to engage with the family dynamics in ways he'd avoided for years. The process didn't result in perfect healing or complete resolution of long-standing issues, but it did create space for honest conversation and mutual understanding that allowed Sarah to make her decision from a place of strength rather than guilt or obligation. She ultimately chose to donate, but within the context of clear boundaries and ongoing family therapy that addressed the underlying relationship problems. News of our success with Sarah's family spread through medical networks faster than we'd anticipated. Transplant coordinators from hospitals across the Pacific Northwest began referring families who were struggling with similar dynamics. Dr. Williams became one of our strongest advocates, regularly citing our work in medical journals and professional conferences. What Alex and Jessica have created, he wrote in a paper for the American Journal of Transplantation, addresses a critical gap in transplant medicine. We've become excellent at evaluating medical compatibility, but we've largely ignored the psychological and relational factors that can make the difference between successful long-term outcomes and ongoing family dysfunction. The foundation grew rapidly, requiring us to hire additional staff and develop training programs for other counselors who wanted to provide similar services in their own communities. Jessica left her interior design business to become our director of family services, using her experience as both a recipient and a family member who had needed to change her behavior to guide other families through their own transformation processes. The thing people don't understand, Jessica told a group of medical professionals at a training conference, is that receiving an organ from a family member you've mistreated is actually harder than being turned down. When someone saves your life despite your past behavior, you have to live with that knowledge forever. It either motivates you to become a better person, or it crushes you with guilt. The outcome depends largely on how the family handles the relationship work alongside the medical procedures. Her perspective as a recipient who had needed to earn forgiveness added crucial depth to our program. Donors needed to understand that their sacrifice wouldn't automatically create gratitude or behavior change in recipients. Recipients needed to understand that accepting an organ from someone they'd hurt created an ongoing obligation to work on relationship repair. 3 years after founding the organization, we were invited to present our model at the World Transplantation Congress in Istanbul. Standing before an international audience of transplant professionals, I realized how far we'd all traveled from that Thanksgiving dinner where Jessica had declared me not really family. Living organ donation within families is never just a medical procedure, I told the assembly. It's a profound statement about love, forgiveness, and human connection. But without proper support for the emotional and relational aspects of that decision, it can perpetuate unhealthy family dynamics rather than healing them. I presented data from our first 3 years of operation showing significantly higher rates of long-term family satisfaction and relationship improvement among families who had participated in our assessment process compared to those who had proceeded with donation without addressing underlying issues. More importantly, we had maintained high rates of actual donation among assessed families, proving that emotional preparation didn't discourage medical help, but rather ensured it happened for healthier reasons. During the question and answer session, a surgeon from Germany asked about the most common family dynamic we encountered. Jessica answered from her position in the audience, her voice carrying across the large auditorium with confidence I still sometimes found surprising. Golden child syndrome, she said without hesitation. Families where one person has been consistently favored and enabled while others have been taken for granted or actively mistreated. When the favored child develops medical problems, there's often an assumption that everyone else should rally around them without addressing the dysfunction that created those patterns in the first place. Her directness generated murmurs of recognition throughout the room. Apparently, dysfunctional family dynamics were universal, transcending cultural and geographical boundaries. After the conference, we were approached by medical professionals from 15 countries interested in adapting our model for their own healthcare systems. The idea that family relationship quality could significantly impact medical outcomes was gaining international recognition, and our program was being seen as a potential template for addressing these issues systematically. Back in Portland, our foundation had outgrown the small office we'd initially rented and moved into a larger space that could accommodate our growing staff and the families who traveled from across the country to participate in our programs. We'd helped more than 200 families navigate donation decisions with outcomes that consistently exceeded both medical and psychological benchmarks for success. The most rewarding part of the work, though, came from the follow-up calls and emails we received months or years after families had completed our program. Sarah Mitchell had successfully donated to her brother and reported that their relationship had continued to improve as he maintained sobriety and engaged in ongoing therapy. Michael, from Denver, had chosen not to donate to his sister, but had helped her find alternative treatment options while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Patricia from Atlanta had donated to her son within the context of a comprehensive family recovery program that addressed his abusive behavior. Each story reinforced our core philosophy. Medical decisions and relationship repair were separate processes that could support each other when handled thoughtfully, but that could also create additional dysfunction when conflated or ignored. Jessica's second pregnancy had progressed smoothly, and she gave birth to a son, Thomas, who immediately became the center of attention for our entire extended family. Emma, now 9,
Took her role as big sister seriously, reading him books and teaching him to clap his hands in rhythm to her favorite songs. Watching Jessica with her children provided another layer of insight into our work with families. She parented with the kind of intentional love that came from understanding how easily family relationships could go wrong when people stopped paying attention to each other's needs and feelings. I never want my kids to feel like they have to earn my love or prove their worth to me, she told me during one of our regular coffee dates while Thomas napped in his stroller. What happened between us taught me that unconditional love means accepting people as they are, while still expecting them to treat others with respect and kindness. Her approach to motherhood reflected the same balance we tried to teach families in our foundation work. Love without boundaries could become enabling, but boundaries without love became punishment. The goal was finding the sweet spot where people felt valued and supported while also being held accountable for their actions. Marcus and I had decided to start our own family, and I was 3 months pregnant with our first child when I received an unexpected phone call that brought our journey full circle. The caller identified himself as Dr. James Patterson, a transplant coordinator at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore. I have a very unusual situation, he said, and I'm hoping your foundation might be able to help. We have a potential donor who's facing family dynamics remarkably similar to what you described in your published case studies. The patient is a young woman whose family has essentially disowned her for lifestyle choices they disapprove of. Now that she needs a kidney transplant, they're suddenly reaching out to her siblings to get tested as potential donors. The irony wasn't lost on me. 15 years after my own experience, I was being consulted about a family whose dynamics mirrored exactly what Jessica and I had gone through, but in reverse. Instead of the excluded family member being asked to help, the excluded family member was the one who needed help. The siblings are conflicted, Dr. Patterson continued. They love their sister, but they're angry about how the parents have treated her and worried that helping might validate the family's conditional love. It's creating enormous tension within an already strained family system. I scheduled a consultation call with the family for the following week and spent the intervening days thinking about how dramatically my perspective on these situations had evolved. When I was facing my own decision about Jessica, I had felt alone and confused, unsure about how to balance love with self-respect. Now, I was the expert others called when they faced similar crossroads. The consultation with the Baltimore family lasted 3 hours and included the patient, her 2 siblings, their parents, and Dr. Patterson. The dynamics were exactly as complex as he had described, with layers of hurt, resentment, conditional love, and genuine concern,
all tangled together in ways that made medical decision-making nearly impossible. By the end of the call, we had scheduled the family for our intensive assessment program, and I found myself energized by the challenge of helping them navigate their particular version of the universal human struggle to love imperfect people in healthy ways. That evening, as Marcus and I walked through our neighborhood discussing the day's events, I realized something that surprised me. The work we were doing through the foundation wasn't just about organ donation or even family relationships. It was about teaching people how to make difficult choices based on their values rather than their wounds, how to set boundaries that protected rather than punished, and how to extend grace without enabling dysfunction. "You know what I think?" Marcus said as we paused to watch the sunset over the Willamette River. "I think what you and Jessica learned from your experience wasn't just how to be better sisters to each other. You learned how to be better humans in general. And now you're teaching other people the same skills." His observation resonated deeply. The kidney donation had been just the beginning of a much larger journey toward authentic relationships and courageous decision-making. Everything that had followed, from our family healing to our foundation work to the families we'd helped across the country, had grown from the seeds planted during that initial crisis. As I felt our baby move for the first time that night, I thought about the stories I would someday tell this child about courage, love, and the importance of doing right even when it's hard. I thought about the legacy Jessica and I were building together, not just through our own healed relationship, but through the hundreds of families who had found their way to healthier connections through our work. The National Kidney Foundation Award still sat on our mantelpiece, but it had been joined by other recognitions: the American Medical Association's Community Service Award, the National Association of Social Workers Innovation in Practice Award, and a presidential citation for our contribution to healthcare improvement. Each honor felt meaningful, but none compared to the simple satisfaction of knowing that we helped people learn how to love each other better.
Knowing we had transformed our family's crisis into a resource that helped others navigate their own difficult journeys. Jessica texted me a photo that evening of Emma reading a bedtime story to baby Thomas, both children curled together on the couch in their pajamas. The image represented everything we had built together, a family rooted in genuine love rather than obligation, children growing up with models of healthy relationships, and the quiet satisfaction of ordinary moments made precious by their contrast to what we had almost lost. What would you do if life gave you the chance to transform your deepest wounds into your greatest gifts? The path from family dysfunction to family healing had been longer and more complex than either of us could have imagined that Thanksgiving evening when Jessica declared me not really family. But every step had been worth it, not just for what we had gained, but for what we could now offer to others facing their own moments of impossible choice. The foundation continues to grow, now serving families across North America and developing partnerships with medical centers internationally. Each family we help represents another opportunity to prove that love and boundaries can coexist, that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting, and that the most profound transformations often begin with the courage to help someone who has hurt you. Our children will grow up knowing that family is something you build through choice and commitment, rather than something you're simply born into. They'll understand that love sometimes requires difficult decisions, and that the most generous acts often come at significant personal cost. Most importantly, they'll know that even the most broken relationships can be healed when people are willing to do the hard work of honest communication and mutual accountability. The scar from my kidney donation has faded to invisibility, but the impact of that decision continues to ripple outward in ways I never could have anticipated. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply say yes when life asks if you're willing to help, trusting that the rest of the story will unfold in its own time and in its own way. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.